At the beginning of the 1987 session, we had an inaugural ball, and Neil Goldschmidt was the new governor, and the Democrats were happy. We had control of the governorship as well as the majority in both houses, and we thought we could do wonderful things. Well, I knew it wasn't going to be any piece of cake, because when I was first a senator, Neil Goldschmidt was then the mayor of Portland, and when he came down to the Capitol to make a courtesy call, he just swept by my office. I was in a committee meeting. He made no real effort to pay a courtesy call on me. He went right on up to Mike Thorne's office, who was his conduit in the Senate, conservative. And so, but I thought when we had this inaugural ball, I would try to be more centrist friendly. And so I went there and had quite a few drinks and danced with Mike Thorne's wife, Jill Thorne, and Tony Meeker's wife, and they really enjoyed me. I was very animated, and I've always been a bit charming to women when I want to be. But the next day or two, when we were there walking behind the Senate chambers toward the floor, I approached those two wives and started chatting with them a little bit, being friendly again. And Tony Meeker walked up behind and said, "Don't talk to him." Wow. Things had always been superficially cordial between me and Tony. And he was not an austere or jealous sort of a person. But boy, he laid that one down. Well, years later, when Margie Boulay wrote the expose of Neil Goldschmidt having raped Elizabeth Dunham, he reported that as soon as Goldschmidt got to be governor, Elizabeth Dunham started calling his office there and yelling over the phone, "He raped me, he used me, he ruined me." And she was yelling, according to Margie Boulay. Well, Mike Thorne's wife, Jill, had a cushy job as an assistant to him at that time, which means she was there in his office every day. And you've got to believe that she heard about these phone calls and the disruption it caused when this woman's voice was booming over the phone. So by the end of the session, Mike Thorne was appointed to be the director of the Port Commission in Portland, a real political plum, and Tony Meeker had been appointed state treasurer. The incumbent state treasurer had gotten some kind of a business promotion and quit in the middle of his term, and he gave the job to Tony Meeker. Well, Grattan Cairns was right there. He was a solid Democrat, had been Speaker of the House. He was had run for state treasurer and been beaten by the fellow who left his job early, and there was never any discussion of Neil Goldschmidt appointing Tony Meeker. Tony Meeker was a Republican. I didn't want either one of those jobs, but I certainly did notice that they were given to a couple of conservative senators and not to a Democrat. Well, when I discovered years later about this shouting, I formed the opinion that probably Jill Thorne was coming home and telling Mike about all this. They had something on the governor. Now, both of those guys were pretty capable human beings. It's not like the governor appointed a couple of alcoholic stumblebums, but I think they gained a great deal of leverage by knowing about this rape. And in Margie Boulay's reporting of it, after the Willamette Week outed Neil Goldschmidt in like 2002 or something like that, years later, for his horrible conduct and how he had followed and stalked and continued to demand and achieve sex from this woman for like 17 years. When that all came out, then Elizabeth Dunham agreed to give a much more open and complete account. She'd been paid over $200,000. I don't remember if it was 300 or how much, but it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to sign a non-disclosure and to leave town. She moved out of state. But once Goldschmidt got outed by the Willamette Week, then she was willing to talk with Marguerite Bourlet about the horrible, horrible abuse she'd suffered. But in the midst of all that, she had been calling the governor's office, shouting into the phone, and I think that had an influence on some political appointments. Now, how did that all affect me? I didn't want those jobs, but the way it affected me was Tony Meeker saying, "Don't talk to him." It blocked me out of trying to gain more inside involvement in terms of getting legislation passed. They had to keep it quiet. Don't talk to him. Don't let him know what we know. Because they knew enough about me by then to know that I would have outed the situation immediately. And I'll tell another story about that here pretty quick, and that's about Dwayne Samples. But yeah, that's my story about Neil Goldschmidt, Elizabeth Dunham, Mike Thorne, Tony Meeker, the two wives, and me.